This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the white soapstone of online creation tools, making sure your passion projects never go hollow. Have you ever had a thirst so great it couldn't be quenched? Sensations of cotton line the mouth as the coarseness of your throat grinds into sandpaper. A feeling that climaxes your descent into dehydration from spamming the F5 key on FromSoft's Twitter for a single drop of Elden Ring news! Reggie said it best. Whenever you share information, the perspective is, thank you, but I want more. Thank you, but give me more. I mean, it's insatiable. Where's
Elden Ring?
Where's
Elden Ring?
Where is Elden Ring? While I may not have a drip feed of Elden Ring news for you, I've got a flask full of games to help satiate your ravenous soul's thirst. Soulslikes, an often reviled moniker by the community, mostly because of its misuse, has become a highly frequented term to describe Souls wannabes. Terms like these are intended to give one-word summaries of games to pique your interest quickly, but lack significant detail. To me, Soulslike means simply a game that a fan of the Souls series will likely enjoy. These can vary on a spectrum from using design elements to create a unique experience to attempts at making a spiritual clone to FromSoft's work. Today, I'll be ranking the highest quality games within this spectrum. I get questioned all the time about what games I'd recommend to Souls fans, so consider this my definitive list. Without further ado, here's my top 10 best Souls-like games. Number 10, Code Vein. Before we prepare to dine, let's establish the criteria that I'm working off of. Instead of directly comparing today's 10 to the Souls series itself, I've boiled the formula down to 10 criteria that best represent what people love about those games. Big difficulty balanced fairly, killer bosses, expansive world design, non-linear progression, deep lore and imagery, thrilling combat, ample build variety, high replayability, phenomenal sound design, and a sense of community. In the case of Code Vein, many of these criteria are met with buts, which on an unrelated note are plentiful for all you booty-hungry weebs. What I mean is Code Vein offers big difficulty, but its balance is terribly inconsistent. The game offers you a constant AI partner. Your accompanying waifu or husbando not only splits the attention of enemies, but will regularly compensate for your fatal mistakes by healing you. These two factors diminish the game's difficulty in a disappointing way, but forgoing the AI partner for a solo journey makes the challenge spike to nauseating levels. The game's constant multi-enemy ambushes make this plenty clear, along with the hefty damage most deal, making that AI heal feel almost necessary to survive. Don't get me wrong, solo exploration is doable, but I can't promise that it's gonna feel enjoyable. This bleeds into boss fights where damage and aggression are dialed up to 11, especially in a particular fight that has you going against an insane duo. In terms of quality, I quite enjoy a lot of these battles, but their difficulty is wildly erratic in solo versus co-op. World design follows a similar pattern, boasting visually striking varied environments that are pleasant to explore, but their individual level structure can feel like a haphazard hodgepodge of dizzying mazes. You do get a nice bit of flexibility in how you can progress through them at least, and even if it is mind-numbing to explore every nook and cranny, there are valuable rewards for your trouble. These are often lore relics that unlock more abilities for your character while giving you a window into the backstories of your many anime compadres. It's presented in a unique way through walking simulators featuring still sets to represent the narration throughout, and they're surprisingly compelling and add a lot of valuable context to the world. Where the game really shines though is the combat and build variety. You've got defensive options such as blocking and evasion, matched by hack and slash combat fueled by various sets of abilities based on your code. Rewarded from those lore hikes, friendships, and bosses, codes affect your stats and abilities. As you master each code, you can use their abilities universally on any code you like, allowing for astronomical variations in your build. The aforementioned abilities have meaningful passive and active buffs to both offense and defense, and since you can swap codes on the fly, you can experiment with as many builds as you like in a single playthrough. This helps make the temperamental difficulty more interesting to adapt to, but I have to admit that I didn't find the game all that replayable. There's few standouts on the soundtrack to make a lasting impression, the DLC left a lot to be desired, and the lack of PvP gives less avenues to test builds. I genuinely enjoyed my first playthrough of Code Vein, and I recommend it to anyone whose interest was piqued by my praise for the game. But with its flaws in mind, I can't justify placing it any higher than number 10. Number 9, The Surge 2. Unlike Code Vein, The Surge 2 has much tighter balance over its difficulty thanks to its core mechanic, scrapping. Killing enemies in specific ways can reward scrap, upgrade materials, and even blueprints for new armor and weapons. Scrap can increase your HP, stamina, and battery, the final of which lets you equip better gear and unlock huge set bonuses. Gear all has a level, which will determine how effective your damage and defenses are. This offers the unique opportunity for you to choose exactly how difficult you want the game to be. Farming the right gear can make some stretches a cakewalk, while being under-geared can leave you in Respawn City. I personally love this loop and found immense satisfaction in ripping enemies to shreds and using their remains as a scrap god, tearing through enemies like a force of nature. It's tough getting the gear, so it feels earned. While the basic enemies are a fantastic testing ground for your new toys, the bosses in this game are straight booty. There are a few diamonds in the rough, but overall the quality of the bosses is by far the lowest of any game on the list. Even though levels end with a womp womp, the way the world expands beforehand is fantastic. Interconnectivity is done spectacularly well with tons of useful shortcuts. There are loads of optional areas to explore to your benefit, and though there definitely is an intended progression, you can deviate from the path here and there. That path is filled with a colorful aesthetic, but I can't say the game is anything remarkable in the visual department. Those colors often muddy together into bland environments that lack interesting detail. The story flirts with being compelling, but falls flat throughout most of the runtime. The sound design is fine, though the music is forgettable, and there's no community or multiplayer to speak of. While these aspects may disappoint, the combat is the polar opposite. The limb-based design of armor versus exposed points, enemy weaknesses, breaking down scrap and parts to farm, different behaviors, and the various weapon types add so much to the game. The inputs are responsive, the speed is thrilling, and the ability to swap between weapons and gear freely as you scrap it adds a ton of instant build variety. If you're looking for satisfying combat, look no further than The Surge 2. Sadly, despite it being a blast to play through once, the mediocre bosses, lackluster story, forgettable visuals and sound design, on top of the farming-centric nature, makes it something that you'll want a breather from once done. Even if it is a one-and-done experience, I think that singular playthrough is well worth the price of admission. Number 8, Blasphemous. As you can see, 2019 was a great year for blasphemers to worship games that pay homage to their one true god. You'll have plenty of opportunities to do so thanks to the game's tremendous challenge. Much of the difficulty in Blasphemous comes from platforming errors and an upsetting amount of spike pits. I cannot overstate how much time I spent face planting into these, and that's coming from someone that grew up on platformers. It often feels pretty cheap and bloats what is otherwise a moderately difficult game in terms of combat. This remains true with the bosses, who are hit or miss on the whole, both in terms of quality and difficulty. The world design is a growing sprawl akin to a Metroidvania, and though you can make your way through the areas in an offbeat order, enemies with high damage in later areas discourage you from being overly adventurous with your pathing. But that could be a pro for those looking to take on tough early game challenges for high rewards. The biggest standout is the divine imagery, or, well, the exact opposite, but it's done marvelously in a mysterious and chilling way that adds a thick atmosphere. I couldn't really wrap my head around the lore without scouring the internet for insight, but the atmosphere made up for my lack of comprehension. Atmosphere assisted by haunting sound design and a melancholy musical score. Of any game on the list, the combat is the most straightforward and middling in terms of quality. Attack, evade, parry, heal, jump around, that's about it. That said, the enemy design that frames it is interesting when mixed in with the platforming challenges. There isn't much in the way of build variety, there is no large community or multiplayer to speak of, and I wouldn't say it's the type of game you'll be playing on repeat for years. Unlike the previous two entries, I would say the Blasphemous doesn't quite hit the same highs, but its low points are far less glaring. It may not be a world beater, but this indie gem is well worth a look for any Souls fan. Number 7, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. If we're making hard comparisons, you could summarize Fallen Order as Diet Secura. Force powers add deeper layers akin to prosthetic tools, but the core revolves around striking enemies with a lightsaber like it's a foam baseball bat and a deflect and counter system. Don't misunderstand, the combat is solid, but I can't say that your weapon feels like an all-powerful laser sword. Nerdy nitpicks aside, the combat is matched with the difficulty curve exponentially slamming upward over the course of the game. There are 4 difficulty settings, and though I've only tried 2 of them, I found Jedi Master to be a bit too easy more often than not. The toughest bits were rough enemy combinations that shredded me, but those were few and far between. Cranking it up to Grand Master makes basic stormtroopers godly marksmen that kill in 2 to 3 basic blasts, so if your immersion wasn't broken by the bouncy lightsaber, stormtroopers with competent aim are sure to do it. On the highest difficulty, I felt like the unforgiving damage output wasn't enjoyable in the long stretching levels, and didn't meet the standard of high but fair difficulty, while all the other settings balance the scales too far in the opposite direction. The combat reaches its peak with bosses per usual, though there are some throwaway beefed up basic enemy offerings and repetitive bounty hunter designs. The lightsaber duels are incredible, along with a few gems on the beastly side of things. There are some OP abilities that can trivialize some in-game fights, but they're entertaining nonetheless. In mentioning those abilities, while there isn't any build variety per se, the Metroidvania inspiration lets you grow more powerful as the game goes on, giving you a variety of active tools to personalize your combat style. The Metroidvania notes are present in the world design as well, with extremely dense maps full of things to collect, and parts gated off until you return with certain power-ups. You do get an A or B choice of planets to go to for progression, but it's not too different because you have to do them all in the end anyway. This small flexibility in navigating the campaign will encourage you to backtrack for collectibles, a nice note of replayability, or at least increasing the runtime, but I quit in the post-game due to how frustrating it was to navigate the extremely large maps. Some elevators, gates, or other blockades prevent you from taking the straight path on the map, and remembering how you were supposed to get back to a specific area is more trouble than it's worth. The story is a well-executed, by-the-numbers Star Wars affair that adds more context to the prequel and original trilogy gap. There are plenty of cool shots and moments that capture the Star Wars magic, accompanied by a soundtrack that captures everything you would expect from the universe. While there is no multiplayer to speak of, the game sold like hotcakes and is attached to an all-time beloved franchise, so there is a built-in community of fans to discuss the game with, a community which is sure to grow now that EA has confirmed there will be sequels. I'm excited to see what Respawn can do with another attempt. Fallen Order has a lot to love for fans of many genres, and though it certainly has its weak points, it's definitely worth a playthrough for Star Wars and Dark Souls faithfuls alike. But if you're most faithful to creating your own projects, Squarespace can use the Force to guide them towards success. My continued partnership with them and return visits to their intuitive website builder has reinforced just how easy it is to create a beautiful online presence. I'll rave about their embedded video splash pages until the end of time, but underneath your cover page, there is a depth of accessible tools that lets you customize to your heart's content with ease. Head over to squarespace.com for a free trial. Once you're ready to launch, use my unique URL in the description to save 10% on securing your masterpiece. Big thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video, and thank you for listening. Number 6, Remnant from the Ashes. The most varied in terms of combat, Remnant takes significant nods from the Souls series while downplaying melee tools in favor of ranged ones. There are a large variety of weapons to choose from that expand as you play, not only increasing build variety, but giving you diverse combat options. Each weapon has an accompanying mod, along with passive abilities of your own that add a unique flair. The difficulty to match your toolkit is moderate most of the time, but there are certain enemies and bosses that make it spike dramatically at times. More importantly, since the game features co-op, the number of enemies is balanced heavily in favor of that format. Not only in the levels, but with basic mobs rampant in boss fights, you'll need to become adept at crowd control. It is balanced well by the powerful gear and abilities you accumulate, but those who want a strictly solo experience may be turned off by the heavy hordes you're expected to defeat. Personally, I thought the bosses overall were excellent endcaps to each level, and having gear and perks attached to them made them feel all the more rewarding. This is amplified by the procedurally generated world design that adds high replayability, since you'll never be able to experience every avenue the game has to offer in one go. Think of it as a game having 10 interchangeable puzzle pieces to snap into each area, but you only get 4 or 5 each playthrough. It makes secondary runs really exciting, especially since you get to use an optimized build as you recycle your world seed. The only downside being that you may end up playing through a lot of the same pieces over and over, which can grow tiresome. While the story was generally meh, the visuals are dull, uninspired famine for the eyes, and the soundtrack is forgettable, everything else about Remnant made it a surprise hit that is criminally underrated. Number 5, Dead Cells. The game that keeps on giving, Dead Cells is a shining example of early access executed to perfection. What started as a modest project with a few levels and bosses has expanded to more than triple the initial content, with regular free updates and new DLCs to make up its deep world. Dead Cells is a roguelike, meaning if you die once, you go back to the start. That's a punishing proposition, but each run grants you access to new tools and passive perks that make your next runs progressively more manageable. It's a trend upward that has you gradually shift from the hunted to the hunter. The game is consistently challenging even when you do get the hang of things thanks to excellent enemy variety and procedurally generated level layouts. Your progression to the final level can be altered greatly, with branching paths through different areas that vary in difficulty, offering higher rewards for the toughest routes. You can fight everything in your path, or rush through for time gates that have a bunch of treasure for those with sonic speeds. You'll eventually be forced to fight bosses, and though they are limited, they all have excellent and clear design with tough movesets to constantly apply pressure. Your success against them in the game's dangers will be based on your skill in dodging and the build you acquire. There are near endless combinations that can be melee focused, ranged centric, or even rely on secondary tools to output the bulk of your damage. The various bonuses each item has is what makes a build excel. The many different paths to victory, extreme build variety, satisfying combat, killer soundtrack, beautiful pixel art, great bosses, and awesome community surrounding the game makes it quite a step up in terms of quality on today's list. The replayability is insane, especially with a recent update that allows you to retroactively play the game at any state of its update history, which is quite extensive. If you're looking to sink a ton of time into a satisfying world, you can't go wrong with Dead Cells. Number 4, Hyperlight Drifter. This is definitely a loose fit compared to the rest of the list, as Hyperlight Drifter takes more inspiration from retro Zelda than Souls. But as I mentioned at the outset, I'm not looking to compare directly to Souls, rather I wanted to find games that have some similarities while staying true to the tenets of what makes that series special. Starting with difficulty, Hyperlight Drifter can be incredibly tough, especially if you miss out on the secrets scattered throughout the world. There's heavy emphasis on quick twitch movement, thoughtful placement to evade, and metered offense between the many chaotic attacks you'll face. This is exemplified best in the bosses, which are all fantastic. They have diverse expectations, speed, and mechanics that make each memorable. The world they inhabit is divided into a few sizable areas you can explore to your heart's content. It is possible to blast through them quickly, but you're encouraged to put your puzzle pants on and look for the rich secrets spread far and wide. They aren't just collectibles either, they are actual upgrades for your character, so it's a huge part of shaping the difficulty. In that vein, you can explore the areas freely from the start, though tankier enemies and the lack of the dash upgrade will encourage you into a more standard route, especially if you're new. Similar to Fallen Order, this game's upgrades are less about build variety and more geared toward giving you a wide array of active tools to take advantage of. This helps a somewhat basic combat have more depth with ranged and melee intermixed between big abilities you can unleash, adding a nice skill curve. Though I love exploring to find secrets, mastering the simple but satisfying combat, and duking it out against the game's toughest challenges, my favorite element is undoubtedly the atmosphere. The unspoken nature of the game lets your impressions grow naturally in response to the magnificent art, both in-game and especially the cutscenes. The direction is masterful, the synthwave music adds a gloomy techno flair, and what the game is able to convey with so little is remarkable. Though the co-op mode goes under the radar and replayability outside of secret hunting isn't too high, Hyperlight Drifter is a masterpiece across the board that pays faithful homage to classic adventure games, while offering core elements that I think Souls fans will love. Number 3, Nioh 2. There's a perception surrounding the sequel to the also worthwhile original Nioh that I don't agree with. Nioh 2 is dubbed Nioh 1.5 by many. In other words, it's more of the same with a few quality of life updates. My dissension comes from how much this downplays the significant improvements Nioh 2 makes to the formula. Unlike the original Nioh, the difficulty balance is improved dramatically. Instead of the game boiling down to a melt or be melted affair, you are consistently challenged in a fair and enjoyable way. This is helped by new mechanics like the burst counter and yokai abilities that give you more tools to face the harsh dangers of the world. The real kicker is they scaled the missions much better this time around. I only played 4 or 5 side missions in my first playthrough, and I never hit a point where I felt underpowered. The grind is gone, which was fantastic for the game's overall quality, since it lets you focus on its strength, the combat. New and returning weapons add deeper complexity to a system based around changing stances for altered mobility and offensive power. The yokai abilities add excellent flair to smash through enemy ki, and the deep combos and ki pulses create a massive skill ceiling for those who invest in everything it has to offer. Combat is at its peak against a phenomenal roster of bosses with varied difficulty and quality across the board. The mechanics are so diverse and creative that it's genuinely impressive it's all housed within a single game. They even brought back some favorites from the first game with new moves. It all feels like a giant extension of a growing world. That world is designed excellently with interconnectivity and plenty of valuable loot to find for clever explorers. Some may see the inability to progress in an open world as a downside, especially since you're forced into a linear campaign, but I think it lets them curate the levels to have much tighter design, and the side quests add a solid change of pace if you're looking for distraction. The story is much more personal this time around, which I really enjoyed, and they make a considerate effort to clue you into the Japanese history they reference so you don't feel lost without a PhD on the matter like I did in the first game. The fantasy elements blend surprisingly well with the setting, I love how diverse the environments are, and the combat has a gorgeous, frantic color to its chaos. That combat is assisted greatly by the expansive build variety. I barely even scratched the surface of everything the game has to offer in that area, but despite how deep it is for those who want to invest in the Lootapalooza, it's very easy to equip top gear as you find it and carry on for those who want to set it and forget it. That variety, along with the extensive content in the game that is sure to be increased dramatically by DLCs to come, makes it highly replayable. The sound design is spectacular across the board, with some seriously incredible tracks that evoke a lot of emotion during the biggest story beats. There is a co-op feature with a solid online community of die-hard Neo fans to traverse its world with, and while I'm sure some would love to see PvP, its absence is hard to commiserate over in the face of the tremendous quality Neo 2 offers in every other area. It's not only one of the best Souls-likes out there, it's a dark horse contender for Game of the Year in 2020. High praise in competition with games like Doom Eternal and Final Fantasy VII Remake. If you take anything away from this segment, let it be this. As someone who didn't enjoy Neo 1 initially, I absolutely loved Neo 2. Though I did eventually go back and get a lot of value out of the original, Neo 2 is a better game in every way, shape, and form. One that is not only extremely worth it for Souls fans, but fans of magnificent games. Number 2, Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice. This may be cheating a bit since Sekiro hails from the same developer as Dark Souls, but unlike Bloodborne, which leans closely to many of Dark Souls' mechanics, Sekiro's deflect and counter combat, vertical level design, and less ambiguous story presentation sets it apart strongly enough that I consider it more of a Souls-like than a Souls game. In terms of difficulty, Sekiro is balanced better than any other game in FromSoft's library. That's thanks to its laser focus on one combat style to the point it's distilled to perfection. It still is quite the challenge, but mastering this narrow playstyle makes the entire game easier on subsequent playthroughs. Even so, the signature brutal bosses are still prevalent enough to ensure you won't be able to breeze through every playthrough quickly. The boss roster is one of the best on this list and may stand up as good or even better than the finest in FromSoft's other work. The variety and timings you have to deal with alongside perilous attacks makes it a constant clash of fast-paced action and defense that is electrifying. The weakness of this combat, however, is the lack of build variety. Though the prosthetics offer different strategic options, the game lacks significant ways to differentiate your playstyle as a sacrifice to its streamlined combat goals. This was a huge downside for a lot of FromSoft fans and also did harm its replayability. Replay value that was diminished even further by no multiplayer. There was a shift in storytelling as well, starting with you playing as an actual character in the world. Cutscenes were more prevalent, and NPC questlines, while present, are more limited. Though there are still cryptic pieces to digest through sake sit-downs and eavesdropping. The sound design is top-notch, featuring an underrated soundtrack with quite a few knockout tracks. The world design matches the vertical nature with the grappling hook seamlessly, and there are plenty of options to take different routes as you see fit. Though there are elements that differ in a one-on-one comparison to Souls, Sekiro set out to take the format in a new direction and executed its mission to a masterpiece level. I doubt anyone watching isn't already aware of the game, but if you've waited to dive in for any reason, take my ringing endorsement as an extra push to give it a go. And the number 1 best Souls-like, Hollow Knight. Whenever I'm asked for game recommendations from Souls fans, Hollow Knight is my definitive go-to. The game offers challenge ranging from moderate to soul-crushing with unbelievably great balance across the board. Though there are tiny things you could argue about, like contact damage being a hassle, it's impressive how fair everything feels. If you're looking to sink your teeth into something difficult, trust me when I say there are endgame challenges harder than anything the Souls series has to offer. A lot of this centers around the boss battles. Without a doubt in my mind, Hollow Knight has the best boss roster of any game on today's list. I would even argue that Hollow Knight has one of the best boss rosters ever made. I could go on about it for longer than I should in this video, so I'll save my thoughts for a Hollow Knight boss ranking soon to come. If exploring highly curated levels in an open progression sounds up your alley, Hollow Knight is at the top of its class in that regard. I personally get a bit miffed about backtracking and getting lost, but there are loads of in-game tools to help alleviate these problems. Most fans I've spoken to love the exploration and non-linear progression, and it's easy to understand why. Having recently done my 3rd playthrough of the game, it's immensely satisfying exploring the world of Hollow Nest. With a solid mixture of platforming and combat challenges, the environments are characterized by a charming yet haunting art style. There are rich characters throughout to give character to the world, and their dialogue is a real treat. They have so much personality for creatures that don't speak actual words. Every single interaction is memorable, and the overarching story it weaves will be really enjoyable for those who want to piece together the cryptic events leading to the desolate state of the game's world. While the voice acting adds a great flair, the soundtrack matches it with both sublime tracks that create a soothing atmosphere to some of the most intense tracks in the genre. They add dramatic energy to every battle shaped by exceptional combat. It's simple on the surface, but gains depth through charms allowing for greater build variety, nail arts, magic abilities, nail-focused tactics, dashes, double jumps, wall jumps with eventual iframes on the dash, pogoing, with each bit having specific strengths and weaknesses in the many situations you'll find yourself in. While I wouldn't necessarily consider it a highly replayable game, the depth of content it offers for $15 is absurd. The collectibles are numerous, and everything adds up to giving you more build combinations to assist with the insane endgame challenges. While I wouldn't say it begs for an instant replay, its quality is the type that gives a hunger to revisit the game periodically for another go-around. It helps that despite having no multiplayer, there is a passionate community of fans who adore the game and are very welcoming to newcomers who want to share their love of Hollow Knight. Team Cherry are absolute rock stars. I can't believe 3 people put together a masterpiece like this, and I am anxiously awaiting what they have in store for us in Silksong. As it stands for today, if there is any game that defines the term Souls-like, it's Hollow Knight. This is just scratching the surface of the many games out there that are worth playing. I have the utmost faith in FromSoft to deliver another knockout in Elden Ring, but don't forget how many other spectacular games are out there just waiting for you to dig in. I'm sure I missed some Souls-likes that you all love, so be sure to let us know what gems are out there in the comments below. And consider subscribing to the channel for some upcoming Hollow Knight content and more to come. If you enjoyed today's video, I encourage you to check out my recent video essay on escapism in gaming. If you've been stuck inside a lot like I have recently playing video games, I'm sure you'll find it an interesting watch. And of course, I want to thank you all for watching today. Much love to you, and I'll see you in the next video.